step into the realm of daring ideas and transformative dialogues. This is Voices from the Edge, the podcast that pushes boundaries and ventures beyond the ordinary. Here, we confront the crucial issues that shape our world today. From the heartbeat of community challenges to the untold chronicles of leadership. From the relentless pursuit of social justice to the essential lessons in safety and lifelong learning. Voices from the Edge takes you to the crossroads of change. Because the edge is not just a boundary, it's where growth happens. It's where the real conversations begin. So lean in, be inspired, and let's explore what lies beyond the edge.
And with us today is the lovely Sarah Thomas.
Sarah is a health and safety specialist, professional member of New Zealand Institute of Safety Management, and a Australian and New Zealand Coaching Alliance accredited trainer. Sarah is an experienced health and safety professional with over 2 decades of experience. With an outgoing personality and an inclusive style of communication, clients have described Sarah as facilitative. However, she can also be direct and hold people accountable while keeping a sense of humor. Sarah enjoys helping her clients define what their key health and safety challenges to develop solutions that are written in their language and work in their operational context.
Sarah, how are you?
I'm great, Tom. Glad to catch up with you again. 2025 is feeling pretty good.
Fantastic. How is the wonderful New Zealand at the moment?
I'm looking out the window on a bluebird sky, so that's in Cromwell, Central Otago. We've had an interesting summer. The end of December and January was pretty wet through most of the country, but of course, because this is the week that the kids go back to school, of course we have 30-degree heat bluebird days, although I am aware that is nothing compared to the sweltering heat that you live under.
Oh, apparently. We had last week, we had a few days over 44 and that. But it's not that bad. It's livable. But let's get into it. Firstly, Sarah, let's talk about. I saw a report not that long ago on lovely LinkedIn, which said or quoted the figures that per 100,000 workers, New Zealand kills twice as many workers in the workplace as Australia. Firstly, would those figures be somewhat accurate? And secondly, if they are accurate, why is this?
Absolutely, it's accurate. And an even worse stat is we kill 5 times more than in the United Kingdom, which is horrifying. And I'm speaking for myself and just my own ruminations. I've done a lot of thought around this. I think that it goes right back to our ancestors, and it doesn't matter if your ancestors came on a canoe from Polynesia or if they came as immigrants from over in England and Europe. The reality is it takes a certain type of personality to get on a boat and spend months and months and months at sea, and you learn to put up and shut up and get on with it. And I think that is a very, very Kiwi attitude. I also think we're quite proud of our number 8 solutions and we just get on and do it. The problem with the number 8 solutions is it's this whole thing of actually looking out into the real world and saying, well, what are the options? What does good look like? Instead, we just sit there and put up with crappy machinery that takes people's fingers off. Or we just, this is how we've always done it, so it doesn't matter if he gets run over by a forklift. And I find it really, I find it really frustrating because, compared to what's happening in Australia or Canada, we are far behind. And I think, there's a lot to do with almost anthropological and sociological issues around we don't complain, we just get on with it, she'll be right. All the way down to the fact that it's always sort of a cost center, we haven't invested it. And like when what frustrates me with small businesses, they spend so much money on marketing and social media, yet they won't spend time doing risk assessments and making sure that they've set these systems up with good rumble strips and controls in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. It brings me to a good point, because we talk about small and small to medium business. I think it's the similar situation here, insofar as all of the things we talk about, formalized risk assessment, safety management systems, all of these wonderful things. Number one, they don't have the education. Number two, they don't have the time. And number three, they don't have the resources to actually do these at a level that legislation almost demands them to. So I'm not surprised when I hear of incidents involve small business and that they haven't done risk assessments, or they haven't thought about segregating, moving plant from people or anything like that.
Mm.
Because, to be honest, I don't think our systems actually support small businesses creating safe work
Oh, they're really
environments.
no, and I think the other thing is, and again, it's fed by the she'll be right. We're the entrepreneur. We kick down doors and make things happen. And I have to say, as a consultant, like I've got some deep. If you met me, 2002 to 2010, I was a crusader who would take on anyone. Now I'm very selective about who and what I work for, and I do my scoping meeting, which is really a scratch and sniff. And if they don't indicate to me that they have all I need is them to tell me the truth and have the intention to get it right. If they don't have that, I don't work with them. And particularly in the last year or so, I've fired a couple of clients, and I've also walked away from a number of clients. I'll tell you what's really interesting in New Zealand at the moment, though, is I know you're well aware of what happened at Pike River. Like 26 men lost their lives. It was horrendous. The national government spent millions of dollars creating the 2000 and safe. Now, national seems to have a very short memory, because they're saying that our legislation is fit for purpose and it's blocking business, and they're about to spend millions of dollars on redrafting it again. And I just find that slightly horrifying, because if you listen to the business safety leaders forum, that's Francis Barton and his crew, they're all saying, hey, no, the legislation's fine. It needs a few tweaks, but the real issue is the fact that we have not had the codes of practice, the good practice guidelines that are underneath it. Like, if you compare the body of work, and I am very aware that, each state has its own different idiosyncrasies over in Australia, but the body of work, or even just go to the UK, what's coming out of government UK is amazing. And I find it really hard, because I always start with our own legislation within our jurisdiction, but then the next thing, it's like, right, straight to Canada, straight to England, what can I find in Australia? And then how do I make it meaningful in the language of my clients, so it fits their DNA and their ecosystem? And yeah, and then the other thing that's just really sad is we don't have the inspectors and the boots on the ground to work with and be proactive with our different organizations. And there's this view of like, oh, we haven't told that we shouldn't do it, so we'll just keep going. And you just see it in farming and construction. Like, there's a lot of people doing really, really good work on what to do, but this whole thing of how to do it and giving it a pulse and deploying it on the ground, not quite working.
Yeah, I've seen in the last 12 months or so a lot of commentary about funding being cut out of your regulator's budget, and different deployments, and people not satisfied with it. It's standing from the outside looking in. I don't know. It's quite sad what we see over in New Zealand.
For me, it's really hard as well, because, back in the day, I was an HR GM as well as a health and safety. So I've held both portfolios. I've also been on both sides of a redundancy process. So I'm very aware of what it's like to deploy it. I'm also aware of what it's like to suddenly feel like you have no work identity. And I think I just found it is horrifying. Like, some people who were seasoned experts and inspectors have just taken early redundancy. So they've lost this bench strength, this intellectual property and knowledge has just literally just walked out the door, but then it hasn't really been replaced. The other thing that's happened is you get these people that they come in and, they're bright and shiny and they're excited, and then they end up burnt out and broken within a year or two. Or if they're really good, they just get poached by industry. So WorkSafe invests all this money, trains all these people, they go out and do it, and then they get poached into private. So it's sort of like eat your own young. But I have heard some personal cases of extreme stress and burnout, and it breaks my heart because WorkSafe's supposed to be regulating psychosocial hazards and harm as well, yet it just seems like the organisation's doing a whole lot to its own people. And again, one of my fundamental tenets is having the courage to do the right thing, be the change you want to see, all that sort of thing. It's pretty hard to regulate when it's just feeling like it's so broken and such a fearful place to work, and you couldn't pay me enough money to work in WorkSafe.
Yeah. There's a few things there. We, to a degree, suffer the same in Western Australia with our inspectors, and that it's people don't understand that the salaries are not competitive what industry offers. You're talking about very intelligent people, very experienced people that if they want to become an inspector, take $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 pay cuts. Because they care about the industry and the people and care about what's going on in a workplace. But it's not sustainable. A lot of people come in and there's a revolving door because after a few years, they cannot just afford to turn down the attractive salaries that industry offers. And to me, it comes down that if you want to attract monkeys, you feed them bananas or peanuts. And if you want to attract the best talent and you want your organisation to be reputable, you pay them what they deserve. You pay them what the industry would have. But there's the flip side to that is no one's prepared to pay higher taxes to have the best talent in a government organisation. So we kind of do it to ourselves, and I wish I had a solution for you. But tell me, I also, and this is something that I hear a lot of, no offence, nonsense sometimes. What's all this nonsense we hear about health and safety being about the number of traffic cones you put out over in New Zealand? Have you heard that rubbish? I've seen several before.
That, and so yeah, that's come from one of our ministers, and to me, it's a PR throwaway, and there's a lot of irony of it in it because of. So road cones is managed by Waka Kotahi, NZTA, our transport agency, safe. And it's also ironic because they've literally thrown out the code of practice for temporary traffic management, and they've now got the New Zealand guidelines for temporary traffic management. So that whole sector has drastically changed a lot, but that's actually completely separate to our health and safety legislation. And I think it's, again, much like my comment about National saying that we need to rewrite the legislation that it wrote, it just comes straight down to dog whistle politics. And I think, but the other thing is that it's so much bigger than that, because that is actually an issue of infrastructure management and preventative maintenance. The reason why we have so many road cones and so many road closures and everything else is because of poor planning 40, 50 years ago. And that's a whole different industry. That's nothing to do with the road cones today. Yeah, And it's also, I don't know, the other thing that I find really interesting is, so you know how they talk about the Cobra effect in economics, how, unintended consequences of things going wrong. So there was like, I think 30,000 people were made redundant in Wellington last year from various government agencies, right? And one of the unintended consequences was about a month later, all the coffee shops and then a whole lot of hairdressers started shutting down, because when you suddenly realize you don't have a salary coming in for a few months, what do you stop doing? Buying coffee and getting your hair done. And again, like, I mean, so I joke about being a law school survivor, but my arts degree was in political science. So for me, watching the politics of what's happening in New Zealand and also looking at what's happening with Trump over in America, part of it feels like we're in the Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, it's an interesting place. And when you talk about infrastructure and that, we won't talk about Auckland's traffic, which no one who hasn't been to Auckland doesn't know about, because it's awesome, apparently, isn't it?
Oh, there's a good reason why I live in Cromwell, and we don't even have traffic lights in Cromwell. We have roundabouts. And it's basically because I did work I grew up in Auckland, and I did work in Auckland in the OOs, and my 45-minute commute down the motorway could take up to an hour and 10. And back then it was sort of like talking books and CDs was what kept me sane. And again, though, it's interesting because of, like, they've had big light rail projects and things, but much like that hospital in Dunedin, because of, the scope creep, because of the cost of products and supplies and people, has blown out everything that was originally quoted and scored on. Yeah, things are blowing out all over the place and things aren't getting finished. And like, they're talking about trying to have the light rail infrastructure and things like that in Auckland. But the reality is that, well, yeah, it's that classic thing of, like, they say the best time to plant a tree was 40 years ago or today. Like, again, the growth was projected 40, 50 years ago. Now we have this gridlock system.
I don't know. The last two governments in New Zealand, if I talk to New Zealand people, just before the election last time, there was a lot of, I don't know, anger at the previous government for whatever reasons. I never bought into it, but it was palpable. Some of the emotions that were going on around.
I'll say feral.
Yeah,
It was feral.
but now it's almost like reaping the rewards of what's been sown. Afterwards, I see very intelligent people frustrated as all hell with what seems to be happening at the moment.
I think one of the hardest things in our world, though, which will probably be hard for a lot of Australians to get their head around, is the fact that we have this coalition government. And this one person, David Seymour, who only got 8% of the vote. So he is not representative of the New Zealand people. Only 8% voted for him. He's been behaving like a kingmaker. And it's not just health and safety that's really failed as well. Currently, they put through the Treaty Principles Bill, and this to me is absolutely horrifying, because again, I look at all the stuff that I studied at university. I look at the fact that, there'd been a lot of truth and reconciliation and settlements, and we've come so well forward into the new millennium, and we're really founded as a nation. And now they've written this bill, which, from my perspective, remembering that I'm not a lawyer, ignores a whole lot of case precedent, ignores a whole lot of stuff that was said by the Treaty of Waitangi Tribunal, ignored previous government mandates, and has just pretty much incited hatred and distrust. And again, it's cost so much money And they're not only trying to get this bill in place, they're trying to get a referendum as well in place about the treaty. And there are so many other things that we need to fix in our country at the moment. I just don't understand. And like, what's really sad is this Thursday is Waitangi Day, which is supposed to be our National Day of celebration. And I can remember being in London in 2000. And on Australia Day, it was the most wild parties of Australians of all colours, creeds, backgrounds, celebrating being Australians. And they had these massive billboards of like incredible Australians all over London. And, you went to the Outback pub and it was really, really great. And then on Waitangi Day, someone dressed up in traditional Māori dress went and laid a turd at Buckingham Palace, and I was just embarrassed. And it's kind of like we have Waitangi Day turning up this Thursday, and normally there's huge celebrations at the treaty grounds up there up near Kerikeri at Waitangi, and our Prime Minister isn't even going to show up. And because of that Treaty Principles Bill, we had one of the biggest takeaways, which is a march on Parliament. And I am actually horrified to see what is going to happen on Waitangi Day. And I find that sad because there are so many amazing things and amazing people in New Zealand that deserve to be celebrated.
Oh,
It's, interesting time.
yeah. You mentioned the Trump or the Trump factor. Is New Zealand moving to the right with policies and legislation, which is, I don't know, some politicians would argue it's back to basics, but to me it's going back 30, 40 plus years in the sort of thinking that we have about what sort of society we're going to live in?
I think that would be too extreme a call to make. The things that I've been following in America at the moment, and the fact that he's just been writing legislation and renaming Gulf of Mexico. But I mean, fundamentally, the thing with Trump that drives me nuts is I read somewhere, I think it was in The Economist, that if he had taken his inheritance and invested it when he got it as a young man, he would have a million times, like the sum of money he has now would be astronomical. However, because he has had so many failed business ventures and wasted so much money, he's nowhere near as wealthy as he could be if he'd just put it in a bloody term deposit. Yet he's claiming to be a businessman. Again, I think he's the original leader of dog whistle politics. And again, like, and did you watch that program Scandal with Olivia Pope? Where you
Yes, I
see all
did.
the fixers. Yeah, well, it's kind of like I would hate to be Trump's fixer and trying to like sweep up after he's gone through and just see ridiculous things. The thing in New Zealand, I think, as I said, like Luxon, he's a smart man and he's nothing like Trump. The thing is, he's been hamstrung by David Seymour and Peters. It's the challenge of the coalition government. Like, and again, I'm not the right person to be having this discussion. This is just my gut instincts and what I see. I think the interesting thing is there are a lot of people that, you can feel this fear, like middle class is probably the one that's getting really hammered at the moment, especially with, what's happened with mortgages, pay rates haven't been increasing. The idea and ability to have a good life is actually, it's got really hard. The margins for error are very small. And there are so many people out there that one trip to the dentist or one big mechanic's bill is going to tip them and their kids up. And I think, I talk about indicators. If you go to Turner's Car Options in Auckland, Wellington, or Christchurch, there are rows and rows of brand new Ford Rangers and Raptors. And the reason is that there are a whole lot of construction workers that are used to having their flash truck that has had to give it up.
Yep.
You'll also find the same for things like because we've got Trade Me in our country, and so you go on Trade Me and there's some, real flash looking jet skis and camper vans and all sorts of things that are up for sale. And it's because I feel like, and again, this is just my observation because I'm not an economist either. During COVID, no one could travel. So they had this money that they'd normally spend on their overseas holidays. So they bought a camper van or they bought the jet ski or whatever. But then a couple of years later, their mortgages went through the roof and their pay rates haven't increased. And
Yep.
we've got a real problem at the moment as well because of our apprentice system is in complete disarray. Like the polytechs over here have been through hell. They're all amalgamated into Pukinga, and now they're being disestablished and they're going through ridiculous redundancy processes as well. You probably know. Have you heard about that? It's kind of fun.
Only a little bit.
Oh, it's not. It's not good. But so again, I'm in Central Otago, Queenstown, Wanaka, Cromwell. We'll have plumbing teams or electrical teams, and they're supposed to go to Dunedin to do these block courses. So they put it into their work program. They pay for accommodation. They lend them a truck, and then a week out, the block course gets cancelled. But then because the block course gets cancelled, the guys haven't got the training that they need to do the work to get signed off to get their ticket. And then you have all of these people that should be on full trade rates, but they haven't got their ticket. Another thing that's really interesting, because they just stopped building the hospital in Dunedin, all of these teams that were allocated were then scrambling for work otherwise. Again, often the first people you lose are your project managers at the top of the food chain and your apprentices at the bottom. And again, similar sort of things happened with some big builds up in Christchurch. And what that means is you have people that on paper say that they are a third year apprentice, but in practice, they're actually only working in about a year and a half because they haven't had the time on the tools, and then they haven't had the block courses. And it's really hard.
Yeah. All right. There is so much more I would like to talk, but we are running out of time. And I feel like I've taken you down this dark road of despair about New Zealand, and I apologize for that. So I don't know. Let's finish on. Tell me something positive that's happening in New Zealand. Give me a couple of minutes, something that's positive and exciting for New Zealand.
I can tell you probably the most positive and exciting thing I'm looking forward to is a colleague of mine, Mel Dunstan, and we run Women in Safety. Well, we call it a Women in Safety Excellence Health and Enterprise. Oh, sorry, my alarm's just gone off. And so on the 24th of this month, I'm interviewing Helen Sadgrove. We're literally meeting in a brewery. It's called Ground Up in Wanaka. There's going to be about 50 women. And we're interviewing Helen because she literally has every letter she could possibly have behind her name. She's got all the academic Helen's health and safety, but she's also got NIOSH and NEBOSH and a million practical things. She was on the investigation team when the Rena ran aground in Tauranga. She was a part of the team that originally started the Safe Plus assessment in New Zealand. She's now the managing director of Health and Safety Global, HASANZ Global. Do you know them? Yeah, they're fantastic. And I'm literally going to sit down and just really, I get to interview her about the genesis of her career, what have been her hard lessons, what she's most proud of. And I think as a group of safety people, we need to do more of that. I found it fascinating. There's a guy called John Lazenby who posted this really cool photo of a hazardous goods setup on a construction site. And I got straight on and went, "Hey, John, thanks so much for posting what good looks like." But then the rest of the thread was 1,000,001 people saying, I can't see any visible safety data sheets. Oh, you can't use that sort of bunding, blah, 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 blah. And it was just like literally eating their own young. And it's like we have this mindset of finding what's wrong, that we're really, really shabby at celebrating what's wrong.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. All right, Sarah, we are going to have to leave it there today. But would you consider coming back on to talk more about health and safety stuff in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, Tom.
Great. I just didn't, I didn't really want to take us down the political path, but I was just like, oh, well, let's just have a chat because, well, just on that, just before we go, because I've got about 2 minutes left. What I was considering was, and it's something we'll discuss in the future, is are our countries becoming more and more polarized because of the politics of what's going on at the moment? And I don't have the answer, but I've got a strong suspicion we are.
I think it's a complex issue. I think if we look, there's a whole lot of stuff that's going on around the world. I think the interdependence between the two countries isn't necessarily acknowledged or even managed. I think it scares me that after 4 years, a new set of people can come in and literally rip apart legislation and turn things on its head. But then, according to democracy, that's what we voted for, although democracy is based on an educated vote. And I like, the other thing that blows me away now is, if you look at politics back in the days when there was only radio, you had to listen to the person that you were voting for and they spoke about their policies. If you look at what happened with Trump in America, there are a hell of a lot of people that reckon it was the Joe Rogan podcast that got him the presidency. Now, who in God's name would have believed 10 years ago that the president of America could be based on a social media podcast?
Yes. Right, Sarah, we'll have to wrap it up there. Thanks very much for your time, and thank you for putting up with our wonderful technical issues we've had today. Thanks, Sarah.
No problem.
Thanks for listening to Voices from the Edge. If you like what we are doing, like the episode in the podcast, subscribe so you won't miss any future episodes and leave a positive review.